Hello. See folks logging in. If you'd like to use the chat function and tell us where you're logging in from, we'd love to hear from you. Right. And welcome to everyone logging in. I see Minneapolis. Hello, welcome. Hello from Seattle. Stuart, Florida. And we got someone from Everett, from Houston. Welcome, everybody. All right. Well, on behalf of Booklarder, my name is Meghna. We are so excited to host you all tonight in conversation about this great new book, The Good Book of Southern Baking. And we will be hearing today from Kelly Fields and Kate Heddings. They'll be talking about the book, and then at the end of the webinar, we will be taking questions. If you'd like to use the Q&A function down at the bottom at the bar there, you feel free to submit questions, and we'll be selecting them from there. So, right. See a few more folks coming in. We'll just wait a few more minutes before getting started. See a few more folks coming in from Canto, Ohio, and Kirkland, Rhode Island. Toronto's in the house. All right. Hello from Renton Highlands, New York, Kansas, and Boston. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Fields and Kate Heddings. Welcome to the two of you. We're so excited to hear about the Good Book of Southern Baking.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, I'm back. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, how are you? I got a drink.
How are you? You got your drink ready?
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Make me a little less socially awkward.
Kelly is coming to us from Boston today, right, Kelly?
Yeah, just for today.
Yeah, and I'm in New York, so we're not too far apart. Although we did write this book from New York to New Orleans, which was actually very successful. It worked out well.
It did, surprisingly well.
Yes, it did. So Kelly, do you want to start by telling everyone sort of a little bit about how you got into pastry and baking in the first place? Because I know you have a really colorful, kind of awesome background to share.
I do. How did I get into baking? Well, I got into baking. I was always into baking. I'll say that much. My mom baked all the time. Growing up, we grew most of our own food, and it was sort of just how we grew up cooking, all of us in the family. I started professionally baking on accident. Mm-hmm. And I had moved to New Orleans to go to Tulane University and get an education, and ended up meeting a woman named Margaret, whose parents owned a bakery on St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans, and they needed help one night and invited everybody they knew to come help. And so I walked in to help, and a week later I worked there full time, and that's what I've done literally every day since.
So do you want to talk about those, how much your mom baked and your family, like, because you have a lot of like really kind of fun, colorful people, and that you grew up with, and like there's stories about your mom trying to bake carrots into cake.
Oh yeah, I was really upset about that. Yeah, so my mom baked almost every weekend, and she is a phenomenal baker, phenomenal. Not the greatest cook, but we're okay with it. And her mother, my grandmother Audrey, was a really phenomenal baker. You'll find several of both my mom and my grandma Mac's recipes in the book, the apple cake, Mississippi Mud, and a couple others. That whole side of the family was great. Ironically, and I'll just throw this in there, the Willa Jean side of the family, Willa Jean, who I named my restaurant after, was a horrendous cook and could not bake, couldn't cook, couldn't do any of it, but she was an amazing woman, and that's where we are. So my mom baked every weekend. She was famous around the neighborhood for her cookies and her cakes. And we had a pretty open door policy in our house, and all the kids in the neighborhood would just come over, and the door was never locked, and they'd always look immediately for what my mom had. She always stored cakes in the microwave. We never used it for anything else. So kids would come in the house, like we had a little swim team in the neighborhood. My mom was like team mom and all that. So we were like the neighborhood house, and kids would come over and automatically go in the microwave to find out what she had baked. And yeah, she baked all the time. She created a foundation of my entire career without even knowing it. Even though my first real baking memory is like crying on the kitchen floor, just furious that she would put vegetables in a cake. So yeah.
Yeah, and magically those vegetables in those cakes made it right into the Good Book of Southern Baking. So
I sure did. I've been proven wrong over and over again.
So what does your mom think of the book?
I think she loves it. I mean, even beyond like, the way that a mom would be thrilled that their kid wrote a book. I think she's really touched by how much especially like her mom and my aunts, my great aunts and stuff, how much they actually impacted, and how much like memory all of their food and all of their baked goods, they left a mark on me. And sort of, I don't think she ever thought about how deep the baking traditions go in our family until I literally wrote them out.
And has she picked up the book and found things like, have you taught her stuff in return?
She says that I have, but I think it's a lie.
Thanks, Mom.
She's still like, the pimento cheese that we serve at Willa Jean is her literal recipe. Like, I haven't done anything to it but math to make bigger batches. And she still calls me once a year and asks me for my recipe. And I'm like, it is literally your recipe. And she's like, oh no, I don't believe it. It's better. So it's like that whole, when your mom makes you peanut butter and jelly, it's better than, of course, any peanut butter and jelly you ever made. I think it's sort of that scenario, but
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So when you were earlier, a few years ago, like what was the impetus for you wanting to write a book at last? Was there an aha moment, or was it sort of just time?
I think it was just time. I honestly didn't, it's not something I really thought that I would ever do in my life, right? And is everybody on mute? Maybe. Anyway, yeah. I met David Black, who who is now my literary agent, and he and I met at a book release for another chef and just hit it off and ended up just keeping in touch. And he kept asking me what kind of book I wanted to do. And I was like, I don't. Matter of fact. And we went to lunch a couple of months later, and he's like, you have to write a book.
Mm-hmm. That's a very David Black approach to things.
It's like, you have to do it. What do you like? And he was like, what do you have in your voice that nobody else does? And I said the truth, absolutely nothing. And he's like, nope, you're gonna write a book. And so David Black's kind of the reason I wrote a book, and started thinking about, if I wrote one, what would it, when somebody tells you over and over again, and somebody's as persistent as David Black was, you start to think about, well, if I wrote one, what would it look like? What would I want it to sound like? What would I want to accomplish with it? What do I have time for?
Right.
Which, that's the biggest question to ask, I think.
Right.
And so just, I had been talking to him, and we decided to do it. And I called this woman I met at the offices of Food and Wine that I hit it off with and asked her to be my co-author.
And it didn't
Here
work
we
out.
are. Yeah, here we are. We had to fight a little bit for it, but here we are.
Yeah. Kelly and I first met, we first met in the offices of Food and Wine. That's right. And it was a good call. It was a good talk, actually. We liked each other. Well, thank God. For me, it worked really well.
Yeah, it was my first ever like desk side
media meeting
I've ever done.
Yeah. They can be intimidating, but I think it wasn't too bad, right?
Yeah, I feel like we've done great so far.
Yeah, so far so good. So going back though to the when you were sort of thinking about the book and how to put it together, did you have a hard time deciding what recipes you wanted to put in it? Did you have to leave certain things out? Like, how did you actually cull the recipe list?
The recipe list was a lot longer when I started it. They tell you to shoot for 150 recipes. And I wrote a list of recipes that, I talk about it in the book about how when Hurricane Katrina hit, all of my I always had a notebook in my back pocket. And that's where all my recipes were for everything I was making in my jobs. And I lost all of those recipes and all those notebooks. So on the evacuation route, I stopped and bought a notebook and tried to like muscle memory, remember everything I was making. So I went through all of those notebooks when writing the recipe list. This is the first thing you do for like a book writing, is figure out like what your table of contents will look like.
Sure.
And so I wrote things that were really important and like the foundation and the things for me that really defined my career and the things that define Southern baking to me.
Right.
And like, what are the things that are so traditional, but maybe that we started talking about like how to offer them sort of in a more evolved and less stereotypical Southern way, right?
Right.
So it was much bigger, and then we narrowed it down.
Do you feel like there were any things that actually didn't end up in the book that you missed?
Yeah, I think there are things that we missed. I mean, I've Southern baking such a wildly huge group of things. We ended up with 135 recipes in the book.
Right.
But I think for me, every chapter of that book could be its own book. Like we take cakes out and write an entirely new 135 recipe book about Southern cakes and the history of them and where they came from.
Right.
And I think that'd be really interesting.
Hey, there we go. Next book.
All right.
Do you feel, Kelly, when you pick up a book like this for people at home, like what are some of the basics that you would sort of direct people to understand the roots of Southern baking? Like really, what are the foundational recipes in your repertoire that, could help someone start to really embrace Southern baking, especially if they're new to it?
Well, I think the front of the book where we talk about ingredients is really important, and the most important thing is, if you're cooking a buttermilk pie, which is one of the most simple things in the book, but by definition one of the most Southern, you just have to have really good buttermilk.
Right.
It's not fancy. It's not overly abundant. Like the beauty to me of Southern baking is it celebrates exactly what you have, even if it means like you have a cornmeal vinegar pie or a buttermilk pie, and it's not fussy.
Right.
So I think, exploring those, like those pies I just mentioned, or like the hummingbird cake, which is incredibly simple. It's got a long ingredient list, but it's all very simple stuff, but it's such a good cake and it's so easy to make.
Right.
And it's something that people just they're not super familiar with. And I think it's a really good way to get into Southern baking.
And how about things like the biscuits?
Oh yeah, biscuits. I mean, people are scared of biscuits. And
I know, because when they turn out badly, they're really bad.
Yeah. I mean, it happens, and the number of biscuits you have to make a good biscuit is like the number of times you have to fall on your bike before you get it 2 wheels, right? And like once you get it, you get it.
Right.
And you don't remember how you were so wrong for so long, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are your best biscuit tips?
Keep everything really cold,
Mhm.
work fast, and don't be scared.
And actually, you know what else? I would love for you to explain, because I think this was a real big eye opener for me, was in the baker's biscuits, your use of 00 flour. Do you want to like just talk about what that flour is and why it makes like such
Yeah.
a lime biscuit?
Yeah. So we put 00 flour in it because the way that it's milled, it's like super fine and it's got a very low protein count, which like that turns into gluten. The minute you have flour with protein in it and you add liquid to it, creates like a DNA strand almost, which is what gluten is. And all baking really is like manipulating how elastic and tough you make gluten in baked goods or
Right.
bread or whatever. So in biscuits, you want 0 gluten. And we would make biscuits and add another step, which would turn out to have really chewy, sort of tough biscuits.
Mhm.
So we started playing with flours and getting more tender flours so that we could work the dough that extra step without it like creating longer, tighter gluten.
Right.
And that's how we got to pizza/pasta flour.
So smart.
Yeah.
So do you know other people who do that, Kelly?
I think a lot of people do it now.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Okay.
I don't think it used to be that way, but I know a lot of friends that are now making biscuits that way. So
Did you start the trend?
I don't believe that's ever something I can attribute to myself.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So on the topic of flour, I know also that I think that oftentimes like there's a confusion, not confusion, but like why sometimes you would use all-purpose flour versus pastry flour versus bread flour. And I don't want to get too geeky and stuff, but like I was thinking about like your pancakes, which use a combo of flours. Like, what's the deal? Can you like a flour 101? Like, just because I think it's actually really useful to understand why you do one over the other and why you would put like a combo of flours in something like pancakes.
Yeah. And it all goes back sort of to like what we were just saying about the gluten and the development of that, and something, you know, when in doubt, AP is always a pretty strong way to go. If that's what you have, use it, it's fine.
Mhm.
But for things like pancakes, you want enough structure that pancake holds together, but you don't want to develop it to where it gets chewy. Like you want a light, really tender, nice pancake, right? You don't want to have to chew on a pancake at all. So that's where flours start blending together, is how to get just enough structure that it holds together.
Right.
But also you build a little bit of structure to hold all the like really delicate flours in there. So red flour obviously has the highest protein content.
Mm-hmm.
Protein content means that it's a harder flour, so it's going to be more gluten, more less tender, we'll say.
Right.
So bread, AP's somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have cake flour and pastry flour have very low protein content.
Right.
So they're a lot more delicate. That's why cakes are so soft and beautiful and delicious and fun. So, yeah. But if you just have AP, just use AP.
Just use AP.
It should not be super complicated. Like the recipes are sort of like, here's how to get what I think is the best version of this item.
Right.
But if you have AP flour and that's what you have and you don't want to go to the store, it's fine.
Right. That's right. Like even in your chocolate chip cookies, like I know that you call for 3 different, the famous cookies, you call for I think 3 different kinds of chocolate in there, which makes, you know, the perfect Willa Jean cookie. But the best thing about you is that you're really low key about all this stuff, and it's sort of like if you don't have them, just use what you got, right?
No. Baking's not nearly as hard as we try to make it out to be. So.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really big point, because I think it is scary to people because they feel they have to follow this very rigid set of rules.
Yeah. I think that, and people think of like the exacting science, and then you get on Pinterest or Instagram and there's all these like perfectly beautiful things, and I can't make those things. Come on.
But
like,
you can.
On pastry that does not need to be there. Like most of the food in the book is brown.
Yep.
And I'll say most of the food is really, really delicious.
Right.
So,
Great.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a good question that just came up, which is a little bit, addresses a little bit about sort of having how you approach recipes. And the question is, why measurements were given in volume in the book and not by weight? And is that a nod to traditional Southern baking or particular style?
I mean, I think if you're gonna go to traditional Southern baking, it's like a dollop and a spoonful and stuff like that. So I can't imagine writing a cookbook like that, but it might be a fun, we might try that one day. The doing it in volume was more of a publishing decision
Right.
than it was mine. I'd be happy to do volume and weights because that's how I work as a professional, but
Sure.
they called for volume, so that's what we did.
Makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
I
does.
think as much as we're moving forward into weights and more exact measurements in baking in America, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing, I think the majority of people still bake with cups and teaspoons and tablespoons.
You know, Kelly, I think when I first came on board to do the book with you, and I came down to visit New Orleans and spend a few days in the kitchen with you, if you may remember, we were in the kitchen, and I think you were doing some measurements, and I was the one who may have been like, okay, so what is that in cups and what is that in tablespoons? Just because, to sort of answer the question, it seems that most people still don't have scales in their kitchens. So that may be another reason that we tend to still do a lot of this stuff in volume. Don't you think?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love to see that it's trending sort of away from that.
I agree with you.
That will all happen in due time.
I agree with you
I
totally.
am learning how to be patient. So.
And so as we're heading into the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, are there things from the book that you feel would be that you would recommend that people try to make?
Yeah, everything.
Everything, Kelly. Come on now.
Everything.
Come on.
I always make the key lime pie from the book. I always make the bourbon chocolate pecan pie.
Nice.
I think is surprisingly the most popular pie that we do at the restaurant for Thanksgiving catering. This will be year 6, and it is proving for the 6th time that it is more popular than pumpkin pie.
Wow.
Which is great. I don't love pumpkin, so.
I wonder if that's regional. I know you don't love pumpkin. You talked a lot about that in the book too.
Yeah. So I like that, and I always make the New Orleans spice rum rum cake, because that to me is one of the biggest like hidden treasures in that book. Because
do you want to tell that story? It's such a nice story how you got to that recipe. Isn't that your neighbors that you?
Yeah, my neighbor. Yeah, so when I moved into my neighborhood, I bought my house and I redid it, and the day that I finally moved in, all my neighbors came over and introduced themselves, and I've gotten to know them all very well. And one of my neighbors is from the Bahamas, and she comes over with this. My neighbors also call me Cornbread. That's my nickname on my block. So she comes over yelling cornbread, and gives me this rum cake that's like a traditional rum cake from where she's from. And the amount of pride and happiness, like just the gesture of making that cake and giving it to somebody was like contagious from her. She was so just elated to be doing it. And it was by far one of the best rum cakes I've ever had in my entire life. So I worked on a recipe and sort of ate it like a little sliver at a time. I actually like cut some up and froze it because I knew I wanted to figure out how she made it, because she wasn't giving me a recipe. And I'd freeze it so I could go back and like, as I was testing to develop this cake, figure out how close I got. And that's where that cake came from.
That's the magic process, huh?
Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, actually. I don't think I knew that. So you have some questions here. Bourbon pecan pie is a favorite. Can you do a recipe for it without chocolate?
Absolutely. Okay. You can take the chocolate out and just substitute it with more nuts if you want pecans, or if you want different nuts in there. I like to put hazelnuts in place of chocolate sometime. Also, if you want to make it without nuts, because of an allergy, I've found recently, I've been experimenting with this, crushing up pretzels
Oh, that's
and
a nice
putting
idea.
pretzels in place of the pecans is delicious. Really delicious.
Smart. Very
Yeah.
smart.
Mhm.
Okay. And what kind of pecans do you like to use? Are there specific ones that you recommend?
It's whatever you want. I talk about nuts a little bit in the book. Louisiana has a ton of pecan
Right.
farms, so I always have like local fresh pecans, so I'm really lucky.
Mhm.
But I always buy in the grocery store, if you have to buy nuts, something that's sealed airtight. Don't
Right.
go in the bulk aisle. I mean, besides the pandemic, you don't know how long they've been there, and nuts get stale.
They
They
get
also
rancid.
oil, yeah, the high oil content will turn them very quickly. So always like airtight sealed pecans.
Mhm. Do you ever freeze them?
Pecans, yeah, that's where I keep them.
Oh, you did. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I automatically put them in the freezer.
Okay, you do. Sorry, gotcha. Another question came up, going back to the rum cake. It's a good question, actually. Was the woman, your neighbor, did she ever acknowledge that you sort of got the cake right?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I wrote about that in the book, and then I gave her cake since then. We trade baked goods every holiday.
Mhm.
But also when I got the book, she was one of the first people I took it to her, and I was like, I wrote the story about how we figured this out.
It's funny.
She was just beside herself. She's the sweetest.
That's so nice. Wait. So she gives you the rum cake. What do you give her?
I gave her a rum cake back.
Oh, you gave it back. I thought you, for some reason, I thought you gave her a, I thought you said you gave her a pie or something.
Yeah, I give her every Christmas and Thanksgiving, I give her pie. So
Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, when I was making the cake, we went back and forth. We have a story about buttermilk drops too. She's trying to like perfect a buttermilk drop donut, which is a very New Orleans thing.
What is that?
It's like a buttermilk dough that you fry into a donut and then glaze it in a buttermilk glaze. They're delicious. I've never seen that in New
Why
Orleans.
is this not outside of New Orleans? I'm so confused. That sounds delicious.
I don't know. We're usually so far behind that we're ahead. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
That's the magic.
Yeah.
Teresa wants to know what your favorite dessert is and if you prefer vanilla or chocolate.
Generally I prefer chocolate. 9 times out of 10. My favorite dessert. I really will admit that I love a very, very good brownie sundae.
Mm.
And also there's a picture in the book of chocolate cake and a bowl of milk.
Yes.
That's as good as it gets to me.
That is awesome.
That's as good as it gets.
Did you get that from your dad?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. I thought so. I've never had that, but I have it side by side.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
No, it's poured over. Like changes the texture of the cake as you eat it, and then the icing changes. And
do you eat it with a spoon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the icing, because it gets cold and the icing will stick to the spoon, so it changes the texture even more.
Wow.
If you've never dumped milk over your chocolate cake, try it tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
As soon as we get off, I'm on that. Erica wants to know if you have any advice on how to become a better baker.
Just practice.
Yeah.
Practice, have fun. I think, going back to how we make baking really hard and difficult for no reason, I think you have to define what better means to you. Like, is it better that you have more consistent results? Is it better that you know how to make more things? Is it better because you can make this recipe in this amount of time with this amount of mess? Like, define what that is and just practice that.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you, but this is sort of going back to something we spoke about a little bit before. Do you still feel like it'd be great to master, like should someone try to master, for instance, like a custard or a basic cake, like a sponge cake, or, are there things that you feel just that would, if there's like a single, like there are certain recipes that help you get better at a lot of recipes.
Right.
You understand?
I think if you can master one biscuit, you're doing great. I think if you can master pie dough, you can do just about anything. Like, right. It seems like the most simple, like it's that same category as biscuits, where it's very simple, a few ingredients, a very not very technical technique, but you have to do it right. And if you can master a pie crust, you can do it like opens up the door to anything sweet, anything savory, right? And I think anybody that can make like a really good, perfect custard is a phenomenal baker, regardless if it's the only thing they can do.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a really amazing feeling to be able to like do something that well.
Right.
Consistently.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny, there's a question about if there's pie dough recipe in the book. There certainly is pie dough recipe, which leads me to two different things. One is that you should tell the people listening what the original title of the book was.
Oh, we called this book for the first, year and a half that we were writing it. We called it My Lust for Crust.
Correct. Which sadly got, axed by our publisher, but I love the title now, I think is actually a better title. So, but that speaks volumes to your feelings about pie dough and crust and all that good stuff. But also that makes me want to, there are pie dough recipes, but just one of my favorite things I also learned from you was that saltine crust. Can you just speak like a little bit about that? Because I just don't know if people picked up on it in the book, but it's so smart and fun.
Yeah, so there is a recipe in the book. It's my great aunt Wilma Jean's lemon chiffon pie, and it has a saltine crust, much in the way you do like a graham cracker crust or gingerbread crust or anything like that for a cheesecake. And she would do that. She would do that every once in a while when she was out of graham crackers when I was a kid, which I later learned was a trick that she learned during the Depression when they couldn't afford graham crackers. They always had saltine crackers or some sort of cracker. So she would use those crackers to make this pie. And I didn't think much of it as a kid. And then I went to eat at Crook's Corner in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, and Bill Smith had it on his menu. Just a lemon pie with saltine crust. And it really, that was a huge moment in my career where somebody was celebrating like the highbrow, lowbrow, like true history of Southern baking and how resilient it is even in a depression, and really made me sort of like dive back into where I'm from.
I love that.
Yeah.
And on a practical level, there's nothing like that salty sweet mix is so addictive. It's so good.
It's a really good.
So good. Question for you is, Lisa can't find the sorghum syrup recommended for the cornbread. Is there another one that's more widely available? That's almost.
You can use Staines cane syrup. What part of the world are you in?
I don't know where she is.
You do Staines cane syrup. You can use maple syrup. You could use sorghum if you're in the South. You can use any sort of dark sugary syrup.
Okay.
Not like sugary, but
right.
Sugar product.
Perfect. And now Nicole asked a question about, she's very excited to get your book. She said her partner's from the South, but developed a dairy intolerance as an adult, and eating Southern baking can be a problem. Do you have any tips for someone who can't eat butter or milk? She said, happy to eat it all myself, but I'd like to share sometimes. I'm with
no, I get that. Yeah. I have been experimenting a lot with that. I last November gave up dairy and sugar and gluten and alcohol for a while. So it really kind of opened my eyes on how to bake like that and how to bake without the traditional fundamentals. And I found a lot of alternative butters that work really, really well in baking, as well as learning how to adapt recipes with like stuff like ghee. And that is sort of like a new thing I'm figuring out now. I don't feel like an expert, like I could talk about it, but I haven't found an alternative product that has let me down yet. I think the things that you find at the market are there for a reason.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
So another question, there's a lot of questions. So this is about the cinnamon rolls. I think the question is, why does a cinnamon roll recipe require 2 different sized pans? And then there's a second question about that, but do you want to answer the pan size on the cinnamon rolls?
Does it require 2 different?
I don't know. It's funny. I have to go look back and see myself. Let's hold on that one and try to think about that. But
I'll be real honest and like paint the true picture. So the recipe may have been written before the photo shoot, and then the photo shoot, the cake
Oh,
was smaller, and maybe I
actually,
forgot.
Kelly, I think that's exactly what happened because I seem to remember in the edit,
Yeah.
I remember actually looking at, so for anyone who doesn't know, like you go through multiple passes on a book before it actually is finished. And so I remember reading the recipe next to the photo. And I think that's exactly what happened, is that it was photographed differently than it was written, which does.
I just got an affirmative on that from
Okay.
our boss.
Okay. So Kelly, how can you serve the cinnamon buns on Christmas morning? If it needs to take an hour and a half to rise, could you freeze and reheat them? Can they proof overnight?
Yeah, what I would do if you want to make the dough ahead of time and freeze them, pull them out the day before on Christmas Eve, line them up on the pan, cover them in plastic wrap, and just put them in the fridge. And the fridge basically slows the rise. So if it's in the fridge overnight, it'll rise slow enough that the next morning you can just like pull them out, let them come to room temperature, and then throw them in the oven and you're good to go.
Perfect. That's a good answer. And then Alyssa says she has a lot of fig and persimmon compote. She puts them down to preserve them. Could she swirl the compote into a cake batter that she makes with almond and coconut flour? Will it make the cake not rise?
It shouldn't. So I talk about this with the crummy coffee cake. Make sure to spread it around the edge. Don't do a big pile in the middle. Otherwise the cake will it'll just sink the cake. So just make sure it's a nice even layer and maybe leave a little hole in the middle that's like a donut. Not too big because you still want that compote in every bite, but just don't weigh down the middle.
Perfect. That sounds good. Good advice. So when you and I were writing this together, there were some really good things in the front of the book that you talked about, and they were just like your tips to success. And so you mentioned something about how important it is, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about all of your ingredients being at the same temperature.
Right. So
why does that actually make a difference on the final outcome? Like, does it really matter? Because truthfully, like it says, like it'll say exit room temperature, and I sort of roll my eyes a little bit to that, but maybe I'm not.
It does. And as much as I say that baking shouldn't be overthought and it shouldn't be intimidating and it shouldn't be scary, like there are very few like concrete rules, and if you follow them, baking is not scary or intimidating. The idea of things being at room temperature, and I'm going to talk about this with cakes versus like pie dough. The whole control of a cake, like the whole mixing process and the chemistry behind cake is you're taking all these ingredients and making an emulsion, which means all these things have to blend together on the cellular level to bake and come out as this beautiful thing. Sometimes you'll get a cake that's grainy. Sometimes you get a cake where the butter goes away. Like it just like separates from the cake. Like all these things happen means that you didn't create a strong emulsion when you mixed the cake. So you cream butter and sugar at the beginning of almost every cake. And then you put eggs in and you get this beautiful whipped, light and fluffy, all the words that we use. And then you put cold eggs in, and then it looks like there's little slivers of butter and this and that, and nothing combines.
Right.
And then you get to a point where you're adding the flour and stuff, and we've talked about how the flour protein count with a cake. You want something with low protein because you don't want it to be chewy or dense. The minute you add the flour, you have to overmix it to bring that emulsion back together in some sort of way. So you're going to have a tough, chewy, dense cake. Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
I mean, there are much worse things in the world, but if you can just put your eggs out of the fridge, and if you're in a rush, put them in slightly warm water, it takes 10 minutes to warm them up.
That's true.
You keep them, but the thing with like biscuits and pie dough is you don't want to create that emulsion. When you make your pie dough, you want to see like flakes and little swirls of butter everywhere, because you like the minute it's all together, you lose any ability for it to flake, because when the crust goes in the oven and the water evaporates out of the butter, that's what makes it rise and makes it really flaky.
Right.
All mixed in, you ruin the opportunity for that. So that's why things are cold. Butter's cold going in the flour versus trying to make everything one temperature.
I see. And what is you're very big on baking things from the freezer, which is again something that I wasn't super familiar with, but like a lot of your cookies and the biscuits and stuff, you prefer, it seems, to bake them from the freezer. Can you speak of like why?
Yeah, I mean, with cookies, there's this process we call maturing, and I don't really talk about it like that in the book because it seems a little against me saying that baking is easy. We mature cookie dough and age it, and it basically allows everything in that cookie dough to hydrate while it freezes.
Right.
And it's just a matter of like control. Like when it's frozen, things freeze at a temperature and that's where they are. And when they go in the oven, you have control over the spread. That's what it boils down with cookies.
Right.
With biscuits, I like them to go frozen into the oven because that makes them rise more, in my experience.
Why? Do you know why?
It's with the evaporation because it's so cold going to so hot. The water evaporates quicker than if everything's room temperature going in. Okay. It just sort of forces itself out, and there's a little bit of a struggle. It just creates more like a souffle.
Right.
More rise in those items.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's an amazing tip.
I've made a lot of mistakes to learn that.
Yeah, that's why we buy your book, Kelly, because you can figure it out for us. Were there other things that I feel like there were a few other things that are just like they seem small, but they're pretty significant. Like, and this one's probably most people do it, but it's rotating your baking sheet in the oven. That actually can have a big impact, I think, right on the final outcome of things. Were there other things? I'm trying to remember. Go ahead.
Yeah, somebody's asked about convection baking versus normal baking and what's the preference. I don't have a preference. I just know to like convection baking, you reduce your temperature by about 25% and you definitely rotate because the way that the fan blows air will be uneven no matter how great that oven is. So if you turn it halfway through, you're giving more even heat to the whole tray, right? Or the cake pan or whatever it is. Normal baking, again, regular temperature, always turn it. Ovens have hot spots. No oven is the same.
Right.
So it just really depends on your oven. But I think every baked good in any oven benefits from being rotated.
I agree with you. And then there were some other questions I had for you just to talk about some of the things you do, because you speckled the book with some really good tips throughout that you sort of have to really pick through. But before I ask those, I do want to ask Brenda's question. Do you have a certain brand of pan that you really like, Kelly?
Nope.
Okay.
My cheap Target sheet tray is better than any fancy high price tag pan I've ever had. So
right.
Yeah,
you don't get fussy about that stuff.
There's nothing fancy about me. So.
Yeah. So these were some of the tips that I gleaned from your book that I love. One is your bran muffins. You toast the bran before. Does that, I don't know, like, was that something that you sort of like you just knew from the carrot cake days, or?
No, it was like how to enhance the flavor. Like, how do you make a bran muffin that tastes really delicious? There are a lot of bran muffins out there that don't.
I agree.
And I think bran is actually a really delicious flavor that often gets lost in a bran muffin because I think traditionally so much stuff has been added to a bran muffin to make it something people want to eat that you lost the original flavor of what was there. So for me, it's all about how do I like really show off the main flavor that's supposed to be in that item.
Right.
I started toasting it because it made it more delicious.
Yeah, I have to say I've never really found a bran muffin appealing, and when the whole concept of toasting the bran had totally changed my concept of what it could taste like. Yeah.
It's good.
The other thing was this is like, I don't know why I'm sort of obsessed with all the recipes in your book. This is the one that really, just sticks with me, and you're gonna laugh. It's just maybe because this is my jam, is the the milk chocolate peanut butter cookies
Uh-huh.
because you add the honey roasted peanuts into that. And by the way, I have those in my freezer, just so you know.
Good.
Do you want to that's also a good, it's just a nice story. Also, it speaks to how good you are about really learning from the people around you, and you always have been in your career. I mean, you've really picked up so many things along the way. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean, the peanut butter cookie, I had a recipe that I really liked. Now I don't know why, looking back. And then I had the peanut butter cookie from Craftsman and Wolves in San Francisco, and that like set a new bar.
Yeah.
And I had this really talented pastry chef working with me named Lexi, who she was in charge of all the cookies. And I had that cookie at Craftsman and Wolves, and I was like, we can do better. We have to do better. Like, this cookie was so good, and I was trying to explain to her what was so great about it. So I just ordered some and gave them to her and told her, let's figure it out. And
Right.
she made the version of the Lexi's peanut butter chocolate cookies and gave it to me. And I had been on a personal adventure of loving honey roasted peanuts. Because I go through phases and I'm like, ooh, I want those. And I was like, why don't we try that? And that's literally all I contributed to that recipe, is like, I just want to eat these all the time, so put them in your cookies.
It's really smart.
I think they're really delicious.
I think they're really
I
delicious.
wish I could take credit for them, but
the other thing that I don't know why, again, like you wrote a really nice story about your lemon pound cake.
Oh yeah.
Another thing, will you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, that's sort of the same as my neighbor who brings me the pound cake. This woman used to bring this lemon pound cake, and it was the most delicious thing I've ever had, and it like haunted me for years how good it was. And after Katrina, I left New Orleans for 5 years and traveled and lived in San Francisco and did all these things. I thought about that cake all the time. So when I came back to New Orleans, thankfully I got another cake upon my return, and it was just as delicious as I remembered. And I just worked and worked and worked on how to make that cake and how to figure it out. Oh, it's so good. And the lemon, the little powdered lemonade is
That's it. That was the secret. That's why I thought it was so funny, because again, like, I don't think people expect someone who, like, with your background and your sort of experience, to be open to putting lemonade mix into a cake. But I think
delicious
amazing.
Food,
yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah,
I think that's amazing. I love that. And then what about the other thing that I don't, and I think this is again something that you sort of picked up along the road, is how you like to serve your angel food cake.
Oh yeah, I like to. I have always been obsessed with texture and temperature and eating desserts. I was taught at a very early stage in my career about palate fatigue and how like eating, and that's why I like the cake in the bowl of milk. Like, it changes texture the whole time you eat it, and you can have a really delicious chocolate cake, and like 4 bites into it, when every bite's the same, you get palate fatigue and you don't really want to finish it or keep going. So I like to switch things up so every bite's different, and I always get made fun of because I always say to plate desserts like they're salads, so every bite is new and exciting. And so the pound cake, I like to griddle it in clarified butter, like a grilled cheese. So it's like hot and crispy on the outside, and then just so soft and delicate on the inside. Oh, so good. It's so good.
Wait, can you do it with pound cake and angel food cake? Or
you can do it with any cake whatsoever.
Griddle it up.
Yeah. My alarm's going off. I don't know.
It sounds like it.
Over here.
Actually, someone wants to know if you could swirl lemon curd into that lemon pound cake, and if so, how would you do that?
I would do that right at the end before you put it in the oven. And just be really sort of delicate and intentional with it, so that it doesn't, like the fig and persimmon chutney, so it doesn't weigh it down.
Right.
Do a little swirl. It'll be delicious. Save some to serve beside it, because like cold lemon curd, if you ever want to griddle that cake and it's warm and crispy with the cold.
That sounds very good.
Yeah, it's real good.
That's a great idea. Kelly, what's the worst dessert you've ever made?
Oh man, so many.
Come on now. Give us a few. Give us a few. Tell us.
I mean, I look back and I think, I see menus that I wrote when I was first starting out in like, the late 90s. And I just wonder how any of that was ever like chocolate soup was a trend. I mean, just terrible, terrible stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what the worst is.
Right.
I've made a lot of really bad things.
Haven't they been going out since they were about
Part of the learning process, I imagine.
Yeah, I think so. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And are there desserts you don't like you still to this day won't eat, or have you managed to work your way around the things that you used to not like? Like I know you're not a gigantic fan of the texture of coconut.
Yeah, I like the flavor of coconut. I don't love the texture of it when it gets in the back of my mouth. Anything I won't eat. I just don't like super sweet desserts.
Right.
When people just put stuff on top of stuff and more stuff just for the sake of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Right.
And I really will admit the trend of having like lots of bacon, like savory, smoky, like I'm not a big fan of that. I like salty sweet a whole bunch, but that takes it to a level I'm not particularly interested in.
Not your cup of tea. I get it. And I wanted to also just go back to thinking in terms of creating the book. Are there when you guys were doing the photo shoot, was that your first time actually sort of producing, putting that, what was that like for you?
Oh, it was insane. We had a team come in from the West Coast and New York to New Orleans. And we had this not very large area in an Airbnb. And we had 10 days to shoot the entire shot list, which means, making all the things and all the stages, food styling, doing the shots, making up shots that we missed, doing extra stuff. I don't know how anybody prepares for that the first time. Like that's something you have to like do and get through to understand how it works and like prepare for the worst.
Right.
Just because it's such hard work. Like it's so rewarding. It was so much fun. But it was hard. But I'm stunned by the way it came out.
And it looks, I think it looks beautiful, of course, but what do you do with all of the food after you shoot it? I think
we donated all of ours.
So
Yeah.
Really? So where did you donate it to?
So we separated everything into edible and not, because like there's, some of the processes of doing the shot makes it something I wouldn't hand off to a stranger. So everything that was edible was given to homeless shelters in New Orleans every day. So
you made people probably pretty happy with that.
I hope so.
I hope so too. I think so. So we have a few last questions, Kelly. Do you find a difference in baking times when you use a light colored aluminum cookie sheet as opposed to a darker one?
Yeah, and I always try to use lighter ones.
Yeah.
I find that darker ones always
Bless you.
betray me 100 times. Yeah.
Yeah, agree. And Vicky wants to know, she tends to cut the sugar in half in desserts. Does that affect the integrity and texture of the desserts? And also like maybe cookies versus cakes? Because I know sugar has a lot to do with the structure. So
cutting sugar in cookies is always a little bit more risky than cakes.
Oh, okay. Why?
In my experience, because the sugar is such like when you add sugar to mixing sugar, how much you add, what kind you add, if it's dark brown, light brown, granulated, or a mixture, that's sort of the foundation of the structure of the cookie.
Okay.
Even more so than flour at that point.
I didn't know that. And what about, and it's not as important in a cake?
I think it depends on the cake, but the only cake I would really hesitate on cutting the sugar is something like an angel food.
Yeah, well, sure.
Where that really contributes to the structure.
Okay, interesting. Going back to the baking sheet, there's a follow-up question about, and this is actually a good question because I have the same question, which is some of Denise's baking sheets get that dark patina from being used for so many years. Does that actually impact the baking the same way?
It will over time, but some of it's just like seasoning in the way that we talk about how a cast iron is seasoned. But if it gets too dark, it'll start like when you bake cookies, the bottom of your cookie will get a lot darker than it ever had been, like when you started using the pan.
Right.
So when it's darker, it absorbs and distributes heat in a different way than when it's lighter. So
Right.
depending on how dark it gets, I imagine it'll take a bit of time to get there.
That's actually, yeah, I've noticed actually as my baking sheets get older and sort of darker, there is a difference. And then this is a great question as we come to the end of the hour. Teresa wants to know what's next for you and if you're going to write another cookbook.
Right now, I'm going to have, I would love to write another book. We'll say that. Right now I'm focusing on, good. Right now I'm focusing on my restaurant surviving a pandemic, which is it's a lot right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you got to work on that.
Yeah. And somebody asked about my Southern accent.
Yeah.
If I drink another of these, hear it loud and clear. Yeah.
Actually, to that end, with the pandemic and everything, maybe just, I mean, you and I spoke before we got on this call, but maybe you just want to speak to how things are at Willa Jean right now.
Yeah, we're at a 50% indoor dining capacity. At this point, I only have a city permit for 4 tiny little chairs outside.
Right.
We're working on getting that front street. There's a 2-way island, blocking that off and making a streetery, for lack of a better term. The past couple of weeks have been promising and busier and have felt really good, but the last 6 months in particular, it's been a real struggle.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's hard. Like you have to like go through this mourning process you never expected, of sort of letting go of what your restaurant was and the people that defined it and the energy that it had. And it's finally back to a place where I'm really excited to be able to like create what it is, what it actually is now, and who defines it and what it's going to be and what energy it has. So yeah, now it's an opportunity.
Right. Makes sense. Do you feel like, and this doesn't mean to be a flip question, but are there things that are selling more from the bakery there than ever since the pandemic started? Like, do you think more people are craving things?
Yeah, I changed. You know, the front bakery counter is always sort of the same. We have scaled it down a lot just because of the cost of doing business. But everything is pretty real. The same as it was before, as far as like what people want, what they're buying.
Right.
The surprising thing, and I don't know that it's surprising, is I have recently switched the entire dessert menu to be the desserts that I thought that I was too good to make.
Really?
Yeah, so I have like a creme brulee on the menu. I have an apple crisp on the menu. I have a molten lava cake on the menu.
Wow.
Like stuff that I thought I was too good, too fancy, too, like people had higher expectations of.
Interesting, Kelly.
And people have gone nuts for it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Food.
So in the South, in New Orleans in particular, people are really gravitating towards what they know and what they know they love.
Right.
So.
That's fascinating. And molten chocolate cake, huh?
Yep.
That's like along the same lines as chocolate soup, but it stays the course.
It does.
And it's more than chocolate soup. Yeah.
It's super delicious. I can fight it all I want, but at the end of the day, like hot, warm good chocolate is always delicious.
I have to agree. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So
there it is.
Oh, hey there.
Hi.
There. Hi, Kate, and hi, Kelly. Thank you so much. That was such an insightful discussion, and I'm just so much more excited to dive into this book. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thank you to all of our audience members for the great questions. There were so
Yeah,
many.
yeah.
I was having a lot of fun looking through those. Again, you can order the book online if you'd like to at our website, booklarder.com. We are open for in-store shopping by appointment, and also we'll ship anything to you worldwide, I believe. This recording will actually be on our YouTube channel in like less than 48 hours. So for anyone that couldn't quite get notes down quick enough, definitely check out our YouTube channel and feel free to revisit this video. But that's all that we have tonight. Thank you again so much, Kelly and Kate. It was such a pleasure to hear from the both of you. And have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, y'all.